I knew since I was in my secondary school, I knew I want to be a journalist. That was my dream since the beginning.
That's Justin Yarga. He's a journalist originally from Burkina Faso. He migrated to Sweden in 2018.
Sweden is I would say, small country compared to other. It's a small country with a lot of opportunities. When you get a job here, it's very ideal situation for someone dreaming of a career. You have everything. It's surprising because there is a need of their shortage in many areas, and they need a skill supply. But people who are looking for a job can't find a job.
We worked with Justin last year on a story about why, in the context of widespread skill shortages in job markets across Europe, migrants were being excluded from jobs they were qualified to do, a concept known as brain waste. For Justin, this was more than just an article.
This topic of being an immigrant in the job market and experiencing all of barriers and everything, this was something I have experience with, but it's not usually a topic you can just decide to pitch to because it's very close to you. I could be on the other side of the camera or like the other side of the table telling my story, but I could also be the one talking to people because I know people who are in this situation.
Sweden has a reputation of being an inclusive, welcoming society. It's spent billions of euros on integration programs to help migrants settle into the country and find jobs. But scratching just under the surface, Justin found these programs weren't all they were advertised to be.
From the beginning, it's very difficult to understand what's the problem. You are looking for a job, there are a lot of job advertisement, but you can't get a job. So this is something difficult to understand. When I was reporting on this, I realized that there are many things that are not working. Surprisingly, how all the effort put in, helping people to integrate, how it's failed. So I think it's a story of failure.
But it's not just Sweden that's failing to match migrants to jobs in their field of work. We were hearing stories just like Justin's from countries across Europe, including one from our own reporting fellow in the Netherlands, who was told she should actually stop being a journalist and take up a job in the care sector. It was actually her story that inspired this investigation.
For a year and a half, the team at Lighthouse worked with journalists across Europe. In Spain,
hoy en el país, así desperdicia España el talento de las personas migrantes.
France.
Dans ce nouveau numéro, nous allons vous dévoiler une enquête exclusive sur le brain waste, le gaspillage de cerveau. Nos journalistes, avec d'autres confrères européens du média collaboratif Lighthouse Report.
Portugal.
O nosso sistema de reconhecimento de diplomas é bastante complexo. A maioria dos imigrantes.
The UK, Sweden, Italy, and the Netherlands to capture the scale of this phenomenon and understand what's driving it. We found migrants were being excluded from jobs across the continent, costing European economies almost 34 billion euros in lost wages. A strange occurrence when these same economies are struggling with labour shortages and in many cases are in economic decline. So in today's episode, why is Europe locking qualified migrants out of work? What is the cost of this discrimination? And what can be done to fix it?
From Lighthouse Reports, this is Backlight, a monthly deep dive into the world of collaborative investigations.
We're your hosts, Impact Editor Tessa Pang
and investigative reporter Beatriz de Silva.
I think a lot of the journalistic and kind of popular discussion on migration tends to see migration as a threat. It's, small boats coming. It's quote unquote an innovation. I think a lot of that is just frankly wrong.
That's Justin. He's a data reporter at Lighthouse. Confusingly, both of our guests today are called Justin, so to make things a little easier, we'll call this Justin Data Justin.
Migration is a huge opportunity for receiving countries. And it's in fact a necessary ingredient, if you will, for a successful national economy. And I think journalists have really done their own countries, but also migrants, obviously, a disservice by framing migration in these threatening terms. I think one way to get at the potential of migration is to talk about the economic benefits of really, quote unquote, making use of the migrants that are in the country in the best possible way. And making use here is really a positive something, right? It's good for both the national economies and it's good for the migrants themselves. They make more money, the economies grow. And I think a very straightforward way of illustrating this is just to show the economic costs of not making use of migrant skills. And we did this in a pretty simple way.
In a nutshell, Justin is summarizing what we set out to achieve with this investigation. In the context of Europe spiraling over migration and the media presenting migration as a crisis of capsizing boats and an invasion at borders, could we demonstrate that actually migration is a positive thing? And could we show people that this anti-immigrant view is not only hurting migrants, but hurting our economies?
To do this, we knew we needed data, and a lot of it. To get it, we had to be a little bit creative.
For some reason, no journalists have tried to get this before us, or at least nobody has succeeded. The reason why we try to get this Eurostat data is that it is a massive survey that's been running for a really long time, in some countries, I think since the 70s or early 80s, and that it is roughly comparable across European countries. And we really wanted this to be a Europe-wide investigation. And if you want to study all of Europe at once, then this is the best data set available to study labor market outcomes. The application process is pretty straightforward, but it's really geared towards academic institutions. We made the case that, we do data investigations and that we essentially follow the same standards of evidence that a lot of academic work would. And we were able to convince Eurostat of this. And then you become a recognized research institution. And once you are a recognized research institution, you can then apply for individual data sets like the European Labor Force Survey, which is what we did.
About 6 months into the investigation, we got an exciting email saying that we'd been accredited. We got sent a data set spanning over 15 years and containing 1.1 million respondents from every country in Europe, except for Germany. It presented over 100 variables and respondents' demographic background like age, gender, and region of residence, as well as a host of labor market outcomes like employment and wages.
It also came with a bunch of conditions around the use of that data. And what it basically meant was that Data Justin had to camp out in our office in Utrecht for a week. We asked Data Justin how he went about analyzing all of it.
The first is to just quantify the extent of brain waste. So that's essentially a bunch of descriptive statistics on how many people are affected by these different metrics of brain waste: overeducation, underemployment, and unemployment. And the second step was to figure out, okay, are there certain groups that are more affected than others? People from the global south, maybe gender, certain regions that are more affected than others. And the third step was to try and figure out, okay, how much does this cost? What is the economic impact, both for the individual, for the immigrants, but also what is the economic cost for the national economies? And finally, we were trying to get at the causes. So, how might we overcome this issue, both in the interest of the immigrants and the receiving countries? Do language classes help? Does degree recognition help? Is it really a problem of discrimination? Is it a problem of how long somebody spent in the receiving country? So those were the four big buckets that we were trying to speak to.
Basically, we were trying to compare migrants and people who were born natively and see the difference in their ability to access jobs in their field of education. We were also trying to understand the impact of this for migrants and the economy and what could be done to bridge these gaps.
What we found in short, and here I mean very short, because our findings memo, after just the data analysis alone, was over 70 pages long, was that every single country in Europe is failing to properly integrate migrants into the job market.
I think the first and maybe obvious but still very important finding is almost every country that we looked at has a massive brain waste problem.
On average, college-educated immigrants are 2 times more likely than natives to be unemployed. And we found that this is costing the European economy 33.8 billion euros due to lost wages.
And so if countries figured out a way to make full use of their skills, that would be good for both the immigrants and the countries.
We also found that some immigrants suffered more than others.
There's a huge gender disparity. In almost every country, and according to most metrics, the difference between immigrant women and native women and immigrant men and native men is larger. So women are more affected by brain waste than men are. And I think this gender dimension is something that there's some policy work that tries to explicitly provide support for immigrant women to find better jobs. But I think a lot more work can be done in this space.
So after we mapped out the extent to which brain waste was happening and where it was worse, the next step was to figure out, well, why is this happening? And what solutions are being presented to stop it? That's after the break.
You're listening to Backlight, Lighthouse Report's monthly deep dive into the world of investigative journalism. If you want to hear more about our investigations, you can subscribe to our newsletter on our website, lighthousereports.com. Or if you have a suggestion about a topic we can talk about or a person we can talk to on this podcast, you can reach out to us at backlight@lighthousereports.com.
Today, we're talking about the economic cost of Europe's discrimination against migrants. We just spoke about how we accessed the data at the heart of this investigation and what it told us about the widespread nature of brain waste across Europe. In this segment, we ask, why is this happening and what's being done to solve it?
We looked into 2 solutions being implemented. The first was something called degree recognition. When we spoke to Data Justin, he explained what that was.
A lot of people who immigrate come with degrees from their home countries. It's doctors from Nigeria, it's engineers from Pakistan, and so on. And there is almost this stereotype, right, of this engineer from Pakistan who ends up working as a cabbie in London or something like that. And this is real. A lot of people come and the jobs are regulated, right? You need a certificate to be able to work as a teacher or to work as a doctor or as a lawyer. And they are unable to translate the degrees from their home country into a certificate that allows them to work in a regulated profession. For degrees from outside the EU, this is often a very cumbersome, expensive, and sometimes just impossible procedure. And that then forces people to either work below their skill level or spend a lot of time getting retrained, even though they might already possess the necessary skills to work in a regulated profession. And so a lot of NGOs and international organizations say, okay, degree recognition is a really easy way to reduce brain waste. And there were a couple of laws that were changed, and we tried to evaluate them.
So degree recognition policies had been touted as this Europe-wide solution to brain waste. So, in response, most countries across Europe have implemented some sort of program by which migrants could be certified to work. Actually, right at the start of this investigation, our original thinking was that after the implementation of these degree recognition policies, we would see a big decrease in brain waste. But this wasn't actually the case.
Yeah, actually, it was very surprising that in all countries, except for Portugal, levels of brain waste largely stayed the same after these programs were implemented. With the caveat, of course, that we actually never received the data from Germany.
Yes, they rejected our application to be a research entity. They were like, you're journalists, not academics. You can't fool us.
So, after doing a lot of ground reporting, we found degree recognition policies were failing for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it was because they were a bureaucratic nightmare, like in Spain. I think, on average, someone waits for 3 years for their degree to be recognized. Or it's just far too expensive, like in Italy, where a translation of a degree can cost more than 4,000 euros. In France, we had the example where, in the medical sector, they just implemented really selective tests that very few people managed to pass. Portugal was super interesting because at first we thought, this is exciting, it's a success case.
In many ways, Portugal looked pretty great. It looked pretty great, especially because the rest of Southern Europe looked pretty bad. So Spain, Greece, Italy, on most metrics, were amongst the worst countries. And Portugal was usually in the top third or even above that. And so that was a bit surprising to us. Why did Portugal manage to make so much better use of immigrant skills?
But when you did the ground reporting there, Beatriz, what did you find?
Basically, that Portugal was forcing migrants to repeat their university degrees in Portugal, which is a super costly and time-consuming solution. They also had a very bureaucratic degree recognition process and a very low success rate of migrants actually being able to enter the job market in that way.
So, in principle, degree recognition policies could work. The implementation is just a problem. And obviously, we would be amiss to speak about these policies as completely devoid from the political context surrounding their implementation. In all these countries, you have the rise of anti-immigration sentiment and a push to make lives just generally harder for migrants. So it's really little surprise that policies to reduce this friction are just not working.
Another solution, which Justin mentioned right at the beginning of the episode in Sweden, was these integration programs. They try to fix some of the other problems associated with migrants finding jobs, like language barriers or lack of understanding of the job market.
There are a lot of programs here in Sweden that intend to help people to integrate in the labor market. Those programs, most of them are poorly designed. I talked to an expert who is an expert in labor market integration for immigrants, and he know about those programs, and he said it's like endless training. You are done with this one, and then you can't find a job, and now they will tell you now need to go back to do a training where you should learn the language again. A second thing about the language is that it's not always that the language is required for the job you are going to do. It's sometimes used as a proxy to make sure you are you fit in the group, you fit in the society. Myself, I learned a lot doing a integration program, but those programs cannot change things about contact or discrimination, changing employers' mind. You can learn a lot, but you still need, in the Swedish labor market, you still need network.
Justin makes an important point at the end here, that often well-intentioned programs, again, ignore the political and cultural anti-immigrant sentiment that is steadily building in countries across Europe.
Yes, and I think that the natural conclusion that we can draw from this reporting is that anti-immigrant sentiment is not only terrible for thousands of migrants and their families, but it's terrible for the European economy too. And I think that's a main takeaway for readers from this investigation, is that this idea of Fortress Europe does not really work. And this is what Data Justin had to say about that.
One thing that I think is currently very obvious after the Syrian revolution managed to finally overthrow the Assad regime, there's a very strange push by politicians to now deport Syrians all over Europe, while people who are actually closer to the economy, people who run hospitals and so on, in Germany, for instance, are very, very scared of deporting all of these people, because if they did, for instance, the German healthcare system would collapse, I think, pretty rapidly. So just as a very concrete and timely example of how important migrants are to national economies, even though they aren't able to make full use of their skills.
So, Justin, what do you hope people will take away from your reporting in Sweden?
How difficult it is for immigrants, and there are people moving here for job with qualification, but because of poorly designed policies, those people are seeing their dreams turn into nightmare. That's really the takeaway I would like reader to take. People come here to work. The country is generous, welcoming refugees and everything. But I think it's also inside all this generosity and also these policies and program, there are room for, doing better, and people should know that it's not always how it seemed to be. There are people experiencing, tough situation in the job market just because things are not working as they should.
And that's our episode for today. This investigation was a huge undertaking from over 20 journalists across Europe. You can check out all the results and our methodology on our website, which will be linked in the show notes.
And if you're a journalist wanting to report on this issue, we've made all our data public, and we've also written a reporting recipe, which we will link in our show notes too.
This episode was produced and hosted by Tessa Pang and Beatriz de Silva. It was sound edited and designed by Spuvio. You can keep up to date with our investigations via our newsletter, which you can subscribe to at lighthousereports.com. And make sure to leave us a rating and send this episode to a friend. It really helps others to find the show. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next month.